whakarongo koutou, ke ronga, ke raro, ke roto, ke waho, ki te manu ka kaui e tuku nei. Tuia e rangi, tuia e papa, he Māori taki taki, he Māori oho oho ko te oha ki e tuku nei. Ki te whae ao, ki te ao mārama. Haumie, puie, tāiki. Tell. Valeus Marcos pela convite. Obrigado a todos. Em nome de Morumbi, muito especial para apresentar aqui no Brasil. Eu amo esse país e seus povos são lindos demais. So, the incantation you just heard there. Sorry, I'm very nervous saying that in public. Something that was gifted to me by a friend, and I'd like to do him an honour in sharing it with you. Something normally that it's almost like a methodology that I incorporate in my practice. And we do it when we're entering into, say if I'm going into the ocean or into the forest or somewhere where I want to open the space and allow knowledge to enter that space. It talks to knowledge, not my knowledge, but knowledge that comes from previous generations, ancestors. And also the interesting thing with it is that it talks about knowledge as being something that you have to be open to receive. This is my maunga, this is my mountain. From the South Island of New Zealand, and I grew up around these mountains. This is another special image to me. Sonia, she's here, she'll enjoy this one. It's from the very tip of the North Island, the other end of the North Island. It's a place called Aotearoa. And the loose translation for that, again, it means to grasp the spirit. And a lot of my work, I guess, deals with spirituality. It's a way that I find to sort of segue into the world of photography and into the world of art. In this particular place, it talks about, it's a place where the souls of, when people pass on, they leave New Zealand and they enter into the sea and they go off to their ancestors. So I'm going to have to try and rocket through these slides today. And I just wanted to give you a few glimpses of my photography, and then I'll focus on a couple of projects in particular in my current research. It's a photo taken in Antarctica. I think here in Brazil, people have a strange affinity with Antarctica. They also have a very good beer named Antarctica. And it's hard to describe how I find myself in these places. Part of it is I love the exploration. There's something that drives me to see, beautiful foreign elements of the earth. I particularly like places that lack humans. I'm not sure exactly for that. Maybe it's growing up in New Zealand. But after I did a series of exhibitions in New Zealand, I had the opportunity to go to Antarctica, and we went to the southern tip of Latin America. It was my first time in Latin America, and we crossed the Drake Passage. And this is a shot just as we were arriving in Antarctica. We were trying to dodge the icebergs, and we had to strap a light to the front of the boat. Some of my team that I had there, generally when I work creating artworks, I have a number of people. On this trip we had 12 people, and the idea is that I have a number of, it's almost about capturing different elements of the whatever place I'm in, whatever location. So in Antarctica I wanted to capture sound recordings, photographs, I wanted to capture slow moving video images, And I sort of gather all of these in my toolkit as an artist. So then when I go into post-production, I have different, it's like your artist palette, think of it like a painting, different colours that I can then put into my artwork. Just going to try and bring that a bit closer. I'll swing this one. There's an iceberg. So a lot of the time people ask, why did I go to Antarctica and why did I do an artwork on that? The main reason it's really hard to tell a sense of scale is one of the things. From this photograph, it's really hard to understand how big or how small the icebergs are. So my idea was to try and bring an iceberg into the city, into an urban environment. And how did I do that? Here you can see some of the small icebergs, some of them are little, some of them are big. Here you can also see this is one of the other methods we use, sound recordings. So each of these icebergs I wanted to capture all the elements of the environment. We'd capture thousands of photographs of the surface, and then I would send Mitch out in this tiny little boat, the little tender, and he would record sound. And each of the icebergs was really, really special and individual. This one I'm showing especially for Marcos. Each of the icebergs we named down there. We did that. This one we named Lincoln, which is the name of Marcos's Pai do Marcos. And we gave them names mainly just for ease of post-production. But it's funny when you name something, it different ones, you create an affinity with it. And through the naming of the icebergs, it also made it much easier in post-production because I could talk about a specific iceberg that we'd mapped in the sound recordings and the signature and the personality of each one. And it's funny because then people, this photograph was taken 10 years ago. We went back 2 weeks later and we couldn't find the same iceberg. But still to this day, people ask me, do you know where Lincoln is? Do you know where certain icebergs are? I find that interesting. One of the other elements of my work, and lots of people talked about this yesterday, is the embodiment of the process. And, I guess heuristic inquiry, which is and tacit knowledge, especially like learning through the environment. And one of the things I've talked to Marcos about is a kind of self-recording that I do in my work. So I put myself into extreme situations. In Antarctica, I wanted to really understand what the environment was and how it felt. So then when I'm in post-production, I can go back and I can feel what it was like to be in Antarctica. And so this is one of the images. It's down inside a crevasse. And when you're down there, I did take one photograph, but then I just sat, 30 minutes down in the crevasse and did a sort of self-recording through that process when I'm sitting in post-production. Every decision I make, I'm thinking of this experience and thinking, am I translating what it felt like to be in Antarctica? Here's one of the videos. So Simon and the team would sit in front of these glaciers for sometimes hours, sometimes a whole day. Obviously it's hard to capture those elements of the environment. And I don't know if you can see the tiny little shape at the end there. We'd use a special camera that when the ice crashed down, you would push the button and it would record the previous minute or the previous 2 minutes. So then what do you do with these imagery? This is a building in Auckland. It's called the Auckland Museum. And it's a huge building, and what's interesting about this building is A, it's very good for projection mapping, and B, it's the same size of an iceberg. And when I first started the work and actually attempting to do the artwork on this building, believing there was a lot of politics involved, but one of the things, I had a fear of doing an artwork so big, so large. And a friend told me to just sit in front of the building until you feel comfortable with it. And so I would go and sit in front of this building until I felt comfortable. Then I went and talked to the museum. I said, hey, I want to do an iceberg on the building. And they said, no, I'm not sure if we can do it. So then I went on live television and I said that I'm doing an artwork on this building. And after that, they had a conversation. There were further battles. For example, as an artist, I wanted to do an iceberg around the whole side of the building, but it was too expensive. And I remember talking to the director and I said, Roy, does an iceberg have one side? We have to do the whole building, otherwise it's not an iceberg. Here's some of the process of post-production. You can see that if you're a filmmaker, along the bottom is the strip of video that we wrap the building and different things. There's a bit of ZBrush, which Jason will know. We sort of take the photos and we sculpt the building and create different effects. So it's sort of a mix of the photography and visual effects. We also do miniature models because the first time you really see the exhibition is when you're exhibiting it. And it's hard for an artist to project on a huge building. And so we try and do different things. Sometimes use VR and sometimes do these miniature models to sort of understand what the effects are going to be like. Also, sound is a big part of my work. One of the things I discovered through the work, and I'll talk about this briefly, is this zone of speech. And I discovered this accidentally during post-production. The composer was recording different music and we were listening to it, and one of them I could speak really softly over the music, and I said to the audio engineer, what's going on here? And he said, well, sound is like, you think of it three-dimensionally. The frequency that he had in the soundtrack wasn't where your voice sits. And so I used that and I pushed the frequencies outside of that zone so you could create a large volume of sound, and people would walk around the museum in a dream-like state. And it was beautiful because you could hear kids talking gently. And then when I wanted to interrupt that process, bang, bring the icebergs in. Here's one of the, I guess it's a VFX model. So prior to doing the museum, this shows the different stages of the iceberg. So that middle section is one of my favourites. I'll show that again. One of the things I did was used a bit of artistic license, I guess. So I showed the reality of the physical iceberg, and then I created a section in the middle which was almost like you're going into your spiritual or your indigenous zone, and the whole building glows. And in that we used tonga poro, we used specific Māori instrumentation, and porotiti, and different instruments to sort of ignite the energy of the building, and then all of a sudden the ice crashes down. This is a short clip very short clip from Auckland. It's kind of hard to show my work in video form because these installations go for 3 or 4 hours at a time. But hopefully it sort of starts to bring a sense of what it's like to stand next to an iceberg into an urban environment. After that, I wanted to do the Lincoln Memorial because where else would you go? No, seriously, I thought this, in terms of climate change, this is the most important building in the world. And I've been to Washington DC many times and stood on those steps, and I know some of the guys in the room have also performed on those steps, and it's a really amazing space. So I created miniature models. It was a scale model, about 2 meters. We took it to Washington DC, talked to anyone I could talk to, and one of the things with Washington DC, which has kind of made it impossible, is one, trying to turn an icon blue. That is obviously associated with a certain political party, but in Washington we also need to pass a bill in the House and the Senate, which is kind of impossible at the moment as well. However, when I was there, I met this man, he's still the head of the United Nations, and started a process of, hey, you can't do the Lincoln Memorial, but would you like to do the United Nations? And I'll describe this a little bit in my methodology, but part of my work is the art. The other half of the work is the bureaucracy of trying to get this off the ground. So here you can see letters to the Prime Minister, to the head of the United Nations, back and forth, all this bureaucracy to get permission to do the projections. This is the sort of the design mock-up that we'll do prior to the installation. And in terms of the scale, I'll flip to this image. This is some of the technology behind, but the building that we were in last night, it's the Edificio Italia in central São Paulo. So the building, the United Nations, is bigger than that. It's 42 stories high. So we projected the largest iceberg ever projected in the world. And so when you're using projectors of that scale, you need to have obviously lots of projectors, lots of equipment, lots of permissions, lots of things. So one of the things I juggle with in my work is trying to be an artist, but also trying to be a producer and manage things. To make things more complicated, when I spoke to the United Nations, they thought that the icebergs were too controversial and it showed too much of climate change. So, yeah, that's true. That's what they said to me. So we created a whole other installation using all of the official UN languages and in English, Arabic, Russian, French, Spanish and Mandarin Chinese. And we paired each of those languages up with a continent. So we kind of created a weird matrix where we asked Greta to be involved, Greta Thunberg, and she represented Europe. Then we, obviously South America, one of the official, I would have chosen Portuguese, because Brazil, but one of the official languages of the UN is Spanish, so that was South America. North America, I chose Arabic. You can sort of maybe see the subtext of who was in president at that time. I went on CNN with my Arabic text. Oceania, we chose Mandarin, and that was interesting to hear in another language, about living in New Zealand and around the ocean. And of course, Antarctica was the iceberg that played next to it. And I'll show you just another very short clip of it's a combination of the two installations.
Solving the climate crisis is the greatest and most complex challenge that Homo sapiens have ever faced.
Люди должны понять, что наносит вред Земле.
إذا أردنا أن نعيش على كوكب الأرض غدا فيجب أن نتحرك اليوم.
Nous devons nous en préoccuper tout le temps, pas seulement pendant les conférences sur le climat ou le sommet des Nations Unies. Est-ce trop demander que de l'air propre et de l'eau pure?
Creo que podemos cambiar el rumbo que el mundo está tomando.
Everything needs to change, and it has to start today.
So sorry, I think that could have been louder, but I don't know how to change the volume here. So now I'll jump into my methodology. Marcos told me he didn't like this image because it changes too fast, but for me it represents kind of the what's going on inside my brain trying to juggle all of these things. Because on one side I have a producer and I have to deal with contracts and I have to deal with negotiations. I can be quite rigorous in my approach, and then the other side is the artist who dreams of doing things. Okay, I'm already rocketing through time. So part of this methodology is self versus the world, free, limits, infinite versus finite, And then you can see on the artistic side, creative, genesis, strategy, planning, budget, reality. And in the middle is the designer. And that's where the reality of the artworks happen. The other project that I'm going to share is around the forest. And I was living here in Brazil, and I dreamed of doing a project on the Amazon rainforest, but I got the opportunity to go back to New Zealand. And there we scanned some of New Zealand's most beautiful trees. This is in the canopy of Tane Mahuta, who's one of, it was a really amazing opportunity, and it required a lot of conversations and work about, creating this work. So one of the things we've done in New Zealand is created a repository, and that's through the lab at AUT, and we've scanned significant trees all over New Zealand. And some of you spoke yesterday, Takitakido and Whakatane, that's Poriki. We did a scan of that. We've scanned trees in the Amazon and all over New Zealand. And there's also the sense of muri. Find the keyboard here. In between the artwork is this sort of liminal space of how do you show the tree photographically, and then how do you explore different elements of the tree. Eventually, which was my first dream, was to do these scans and investigate Brazil. And I had the opportunity to go to Auckland. And there are many, many amazing trees in Brazil. In fact, in the Amazon rainforest, there's more than 16,000 species of trees. Brazilians are more familiar with this, but I'm speaking to my New Zealand colleagues. Of that, only 10,000 species are known. So there's around 60,000 species in the Amazon that are undocumented. You can see some of the scans from the Amazon. And James has got a beautiful presentation. He's going to expand on this. And there's also a website you can see called the Majestic Sonoma. And on there's a bunch of films. I was hoping to show a film, but I'm getting given a hurry up. But I got the opportunity to speak with some amazing people during the process of this project. So who am I and who are my ancestors? That's the core of my research. That's the core of my investigation around, the Master of Philosophy or the PhD. One of the things I wanted to investigate was my heritage, and it was only recently, a few years ago, I found out the story of my grandmother. She left Poland during World War II, and she travelled about 10,000 kilometres from Poland, and then ended up in Iran. Along the way, they were put onto trains. This is as a 12-year-old. She never spoke about this her whole life. And she suffered abuse you can't imagine, torture. The only sort of little bit of information that we gathered during this process that she said to my auntie once, she said, I remember waking up in the night, frozen to the ground. And I got quite emotional in the talk we did in Chile, so I've condensed this. This notion of things that we carry, not knowing what we carry, is really interesting to me, because sometimes it appears in different and interesting ways. It makes me think of my heritage, and it also makes me think of what I'm passing on to the next generation. And so the research covers transgenerational grief in its different forms, and then obviously the whales. The research question that I'm trying to ask in this project is how can transcendental experiences be articulated through multimedia installations, and also how to articulate ideas of transgenerational grief and healing. I was first introduced to the whales when I was in Antarctica. It's weird, a lot of people ask me what's the parallel with whales and Antarctica and the Amazon. And to me, a lot of it's about migration. Whales share this migration that we have as humans. There's a huge migration that they go from here in Brazil right down to Antarctica every year. In New Zealand, in the Pacific, they travel down to Antarctica and back up. And it's also the ocean that connects us. This ocean is something, quite often we talk about it as being a foreign thing, but when you dive into the ocean, it connects you. And also they share cultural knowledge. The whales, their song travels across the ocean. And each year that same song radiates across the ocean. And scientists don't know why, but they share that cultural knowledge of song. And so my idea of transcendental experience is trying to counter that transgenerational or intergenerational grief through experiences and through the experiences that I have in the water, connecting with the trees or the icebergs, or in this case the whales. Because when you're in the water there, having these experiences, it is transcendental. It's an out-of-body experience. And then, in terms of the scale, you can see that whale that I was diving with. It's the calf down below. So when you're next to the mum, she's like a jumbo jet. And one of the things that I was told when I was doing the work with Te Roroa is the story, the notion of the Kāori and the whale. And their story is that they were brothers and sisters. And I didn't realise till I saw these photos that you can see the Kāori. For those here in New Zealand, you can see the texture of the bark of the tree. Here's the installation that we're working on. And then the last thing I want to show is a short clip, very short clip, I promise, of my experience in Tonga. This is not the installation, but it's sort of trying to articulate or describe what it's like to dive with whales. It's not just the transcendental moments, it's the struggle of dealing with the water and being uncomfortable in the water, in the rain, and all of the elements.
Obrigado, John. Então, vou ler uma pergunta que a gente recebeu do Ricardo Almeida, mestrando. Ele parabeniza pela sua apresentação, diz que seu trabalho artístico é impressionante. Fiquei curioso em saber como foi a sua migração ou imigração de sua experiência artística prévia para o mundo acadêmico. Então, como você percebe essa transição ou incorporação para o meio acadêmico?
Thank you for your question. That's probably the hardest thing I'm working with at the moment is I've had a career as an artist, and I have felt the sense of family within the university, and I'm very early in my transition. I've talked to Welby obviously maybe for 4 years about doing the study, and Marcos for the last almost a year, and I enrolled in the MPhil program about 6 months ago, so it's very early in that process academically, and I think the struggle is to try and find a way that I can still be satisfied with my projects but also fit into the box of the academic. The reason for it really is I love teaching, I love sharing knowledge, but I feel like at the moment there's a sort of imbalance in those two worlds. So. But it's a challenge for me because I'm used to just doing work, you know, I just instinctively have a process, but I'm learning that other people actually share those processes, and through the literature that Marcos and others have shared with me, I'm discovering that it's really strange to know that you're doing things that have been done before. It's almost comforting to find those methodologies. So, yeah, it's a process of discovery.